Well, hello everyone. Hey, Mike Falkenstein here with 1A Catalyst, here again with my co-host Steve Shermer of Silk Road Catalyst for the latest episode of Missions Talk. And Steve, we have a great episode today. As we, in our last episode, we talked about sort of how to weather the storm on the missions field. And we had kind of a final point there, which was keep yourself healthy, keep your marriage healthy. And today we're going to kind of dive a little deeper into that, keeping a marriage healthy on the missions field. And kind of my opening statement on that is, if your marriage is not healthy on the missions field, you're probably not doing much actually good ministry on the missions field. Would you generally agree with that?
Yes, 100%. I mean,
if you've got big issues in your marriage, it really does affect your ministry, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and there's no reason to think it's not affecting our ministry. If you can't resolve things with your wife, then just take a break. But we'll get into. I do want to I'm going to chase a little rabbit here, or go a little side trail.
Please.
I have my little Beijing Olympic guy here, and you have your. I can't even get my arms. It's different direction.
Oh yeah.
Anyways, you have your little Beijing. Looks like a girl.
Yeah, that's
Beijing
right.
Olympic girl.
They had 5 of those for each of the 5 Olympic rings when they had the 2008 Olympics. And so, they're kind of cool. I mean, I don't know that they'll ever be worth anything, but it's kind of a cool collectible, isn't it?
They are. I was just noticing that.
That's right. And then your little panda that you have behind you. I also have one of those as well. So I kind of wish I would have collected, because you can collect all 5 at the time. But
you think you can eventually, but if you waste time, you lose out on it.
That's right. And so, of course, at the time, just before the 2008 Olympics, they had these available in stores in Beijing. And so, I had the only 2 daughters. And so so I got one for each. And then later they kind of re-gifted them back to me. So, they're kind of cool.
All right. That done with veering off the trail here.
No, that is cool to remember that. So, Steve, in terms of keeping a marriage healthy, there are really not a lot of good fruit probably that you're producing on the field if there's strife and trouble and issues continually in your marriage. Isn't that right?
I mean, you can go through the motions of ministry and have a bad marriage, and no one will know it.
That's right.
People, you can put on a great face, and people will think you're the godliest person on earth when your marriage is in the pits. But the reality is, your effectiveness it's just not there. I don't believe that it is because any good you could do if your marriage unravels publicly is going to discourage so many people you try to touch.
That's right.
And so it's not worth ignoring the marriage over the sake of, you don't sacrifice your spouse on the altar for the sake of sharing the gospel with a lost person. You don't.
That's right.
And I know we're talking about marriage, but the same is true for your kids. You don't sacrifice your kids for the sake of ministry, which so many people do, their marriage included. But I have found that if God's called you, He's called the family. And if He's called the family, doing it together is far more effective.
That's right.
Than doing it solo, and it's different. Like my situation where I have to travel alone because our family situation, which you know about, keeps my wife from traveling. It's not that she doesn't want to, or that I don't want her to, or that I don't want my kids to, but they have to go to school. So I do travel a lot by myself, but
that's right.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about serving in general with the same purpose, with the same mind. But in the case of this episode, why is it important to focus on the family, marriage in particular in this case?
Yeah, that's right. And so, Steve, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, I mean, what happens here in this dynamic, I think, actually is, so you're doing ministry with a group of people, probably non-Christian people, and I mean, at least a part of the reason that this is important is that as they get to know you and your wife, and they see that there's problems there, it does actually begin to affect the witness that you're trying to give to them, right? It's like, hey, if you can't even, you know, if your wife is so and not your marriage isn't doing well, much of what you're trying to tell me about the gospel, I mean, it kind of dilutes the message, doesn't it?
Yeah, I cannot count how many times someone has said or asked something to the effect, is your wife and your kids went with you to China? As if
Oh, really?
God called me exclusively out of my family to
Oh,
move to China to serve God for several years, and I was just supposed to leave my wife behind.
oh, right.
I literally can't count how many times people have said that to me, and it
That
still
is sort of
baffles
odd.
me.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
very odd.
it still
It's like,
does.
husbands and wives generally live in the same place, if so
But
that
I
is
don't I
weird.
don't think I could have done it without my wife. And we had our struggles. We had our arguments. We had our fights
Oh,
and all
right.
those. And in those periods, there were times I had to go out and do a meeting, but let me tell you, deep down inside and doing those ministry meetings, knowing my wife and I are out of sync, it affects my ability to do the ministry, those meetings well,
Mm-hmm.
and to do the ministry well. It does affect it.
That's right.
And if any good came out of it, I can only imagine how much more good might have come out of it had I not had that tension just hovering over me in those moments.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. So, Steve, before we get to oh gosh, we have six areas here of how to keep a marriage healthy on the missions field. And, we have some suggestions for folks. But, I thought, Steve, at first it would be good to kind of define the different types of marriages on the missions field, because depending on kind of the dynamic of your marriage, you might then sort of craft a separate way or a different way to be able to keep that marriage then healthy. And of course, we've both seen over the years that you've got the couple who both feel called to the missions field and to that particular place. I always sort of love that dynamic, just because if you have husband and wife who have even independently and together prayed that God would show them where they should serve if they feel like they're being called to serve, and to kind of get similar answers from God. I mean, there's a lot of synergy there, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean that was the case for us and my wife. We had talked many times about moving there just because of uh, the amount of time I was spending over there over the years.
Oh, right.
But before we actually knew God, it was time for us to move. God had already put it on her heart that we were going to move
Oh,
before
okay.
He revealed it to me. And so when God revealed it to me and I told her, her response was, "Oh yeah, God told me that 2 weeks ago."
Oh, praise God.
And she goes,
Which
"I
is a
have,
real
yeah,
confirmation to you, isn't it?
oh, absolutely."
Yeah.
And she had already told her mother about it, so she was already prepping her parents for it.
Oh,
So,
okay.
but for me, I needed that. I needed my wife to feel the calling too, because I didn't want to feel like I was dragging her
Yeah, that's right.
over there.
That's right.
But for me, that's how it worked out for us.
Oh, right. So we have those couples, and I just love that. The second sort of dynamic we see a lot of times is that one of the spouses is feeling called, but the other one, isn't feeling called. Probably when we lived in China, between one and two, where, I came to her and told her, this is how I feel like God is leading. she went and she prayed about it, and she didn't particularly have a specific heart for China, but she was just really interested in sort of kind of this idea, I'll go where you go, I'll serve where you serve, your people will be my people, kind of an idea, right? And so she was really happy to go. She wasn't particularly called to China, but she was really called to kind of come along and serve where her husband was feeling called. And so you, though, have, I think, Steve, a good example of this where one person was felt called and the other one isn't. I think you were sharing with someone that you knew who that dynamic actually kind of worked for them, didn't it?
Yeah, so it's a colleague of mine, and the husband has been called for several years. And when he met who is now his wife, she'll tell you she never really felt the urge or the calling to go, but she knew that in marrying him, I guess she would probably be between our second and third couple number 2 and couple number 3 on our list, where one is called, the other one's not, or number 3 is one is called, but the other one is supportive. And so, but she knew going into the marriage that he was determined to a particular place. And but over time, God gave her two things happened. God gave her an excitement for going, even though she didn't really feel that calling to go like he has. But she also before they were married, was convicted that whenever she did get married, she needed to support her husband.
Okay.
And whatever God is leading on him. And you can tell by when she talks about it, she's not oppressed. Okay. It's not her husband being domineering over her. She has this excitement and joy because she's the one that explains it. Her husband does not talk about this. She talks about his calling and her joy and excitement to support that and to be part of that. And it's not, for him, it was a particular place. And for her, it was like, there was no particular place.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good. And that's a good distinction, right? Because we do have, one person who's called, but one isn't. And then the third one was one person feels called, but the other is supportive, which is actually more, what you're talking about and somewhat what I experienced with my wife. There is this other dynamic, and I've seen this. I think I mentioned to you that early on in my ministry in China, I did know a couple who the husband felt called, but the wife was just absolutely miserable, So you talk about being domineering. I don't know a lot of the details about how he actually got her to live there, but then a lot of his time was spent trying to just, make their apartment seem more quote unquote American, and she was just miserable. And that's a whole nother thing, right? I mean, talking about keeping a marriage healthy on the missions field, that's going to be hard from day one in that kind of a situation, isn't it?
That is going to be tough. I honestly, I that wouldn't work for me. I wouldn't even, that to me is just, you're just setting up the stage for something bad to happen.
That's right. In fact, I would even, I know, husband, you're feeling called to this, but there is at least a part of this, and this could actually be a whole episode probably that we could do, Steve. But, if your wife is so against it and so doesn't want to do it, and so is,
you don't need to be doing it.
I was going to say, you could probably say, God's actually probably saying something to you in that if you called and this was supposed to happen and part of God's will, he would give your wife at least an agreement to it, kind of like what you said with this couple.
Absolutely. And I think there'd even be, even if there's not a whole lot of joy at first in the spouse's mind about going, I think over time that joy does come. Mm-hmm. I mean, because it was like me, where we lived in China, I honestly wasn't very excited about it at first. And I was just going more out of obedience. But I fell in love with the place.
Oh, right. Yeah, me too.
And so it could happen in that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. If my wife wasn't, if she was just dead set against going, was even the thought of getting on the plane was miserable to her. I don't
Right.
think I could have bought the tickets.
Oh, right. That's good.
You
That's
know,
healthy.
that's
Actually, right.
it just wouldn't
And
have
so
made sense to me.
that's right. And so, Steve, as we talk about the kind of our 6 points on how to keep a marriage healthy on the missions field, that is actually number one, right? That, we do need to say that, at least both husband and wife need to be in agreement that God has called them there, even if he's only called one. Because again, there's just a huge difference between God giving a specific calling to one of them to a particular place and the other one being supportive. Like my wife was not really called to China, but she was thrilled to be doing whatever I was doing, and to be supportive there. And so that is an important point, isn't it? That, yeah, if you've got a spouse that's just dead set against it, just seriously consider waiting on God to change the heart of your spouse. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I have a new colleague who's the husband is called to plant churches,
Okay.
in rural villages where there's no gospel presence.
Okay.
His wife doesn't sound like she's called to do that, but she is called to be a physician, and that's what she is. And so she
Okay.
serves as a physician in the
Mm.
community, just in
Oh my
general.
gosh. Right.
And so, but they're not competing interests. It's they
No.
do come together, and part of it is from a support perspective. It helps the family, helps the
Hmm.
husband in ministry. It gives them credibility because of her job as a physician. But he has the freedom to actually go out and do it. Okay.
That's right. I mean,
Um,
those two can be very complementary
oh, I mean,
things, right? I mean,
there's a lot of families around the world where the wife and the husband may be doing different things. One may be
mhm,
more involved in the ministry directly than the other, but they're complementary to each other.
that's right. When I'm
Okay.
just thinking, like, if you're out in these villages, there probably isn't very good health care. So for her to be able to provide care uh, begins to build that bridge that the gospel could be then sent over time,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's a really good example. So Steve, number two, we have just identify how each person handles stress and conflict, and I would point back to our previous episode, which we talked about kind of how to weather the storm. And man, there's a lot of stress initially, especially on the missions field and all the differences and whatever. And just, knowing how your spouse handles conflict and stress, that life on the missions field often involves unexpected situations, struggles, and sort of stress points. And so to keep a marriage healthy, it's just good to know kind of how each one handles that and kind of ebb and flow and give grace where grace needs to be given and all of that. And so kind of just knowing your spouse in that way, of course, overall in marriage is good, but particularly on the missions field is good, isn't it?
Yeah, because you gotta, everyone has triggers in their lives that cause stress. Okay, and we have those in our own cultures. But when you're crossing that cultural barrier to a different culture, those triggers increase.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife had them, I had them, my kids had it, my son had them,
Mm.
and we did have to. I did have to be mindful, or try to be. I wasn't successful all the time, but we do have to work toward understanding what causes the stress in our family and our spouse,
Like what's
and
going on here? Yeah.
yeah, and try to mitigate those as best as we can when we can. Some of that could be, where we bought beef. It was quite a journey to where we had to go buy beef. Okay, the beef around us had a funny taste to it.
Oh,
I didn't trust it going. What else was in the beef that was going into my body? So
right.
we found a Muslim butcher, through some friends, and it was quite a trek to get there and get back. But that had to be my thing to be able to go all that way, because it was a good hour and a half just to go pick up beef.
Oh,
5 pounds of beef.
Wow.
And
that is a journey.
yeah, so there's things that my wife was able to handle better, and so she took care of that stuff, and then I took care of the stuff that I handled better, and helped each other along the way. And
Oh, that's great.
and I don't know if we're going to get into it. I'm trying to read the notes quickly, but I took my wife out to special places to eat.
Yeah.
My wife served in France for many years before we got married, and there was this French guy that opened a French restaurant. And so as soon as we heard about it, date night. And according to my wife, it was pretty authentic. It was a pretty good French meal.
Oh, good. Oh, isn't that neat?
And
That's
that brought a big smile to her face. And
I
those
bet
big
it did.
smiles go a long way.
Yeah, they sure do. That's right. That's very good. And so, yeah, that's good. I know in the last episode, Steve, we talked about, and we'll talk about it in this episode too, about kind of taking time to care for yourself and your family. And, those are those kinds of things, isn't it? That's how one way you could care for your wife, and particularly maybe as she was feeling, the weight of the mission field and this, the differences. And so that's really good. So Steve, our next point here is just to realize that we do have a built-in team. If you're there as a married couple, I think that's really important that, you have a built-in sounding board as you're dealing with, man, the language is so hard. And I have to go an hour and a half to get beef, and, just all of the stresses, to have a building sounding board and a best friend to talk through things, as you deal with being in a new culture, and just that, you can play out things, and, just realizing that, hey, we're on the same team and we can be kind of each other's best support system initially is really good, isn't it?
Yeah. One of the things we did, some friends of ours taught us this pretty early on. You have days that we call China days. Just, China days are days you don't want to be there. Okay?
Oh, right.
You really want to get on a plane and get out.
Yeah, just the weight of it all was a bit much.
Yeah. And they come and go. And so there were definitely times when we had to pull the China Day card and just say, look, we need to take a step back, hibernate in our apartment, order some Western food for all of our meals to have delivered, and just watch some movies. Or watch some television shows, or do something that has nothing to do with ministry or learning language, or, let's just have our own cultural day. But we had to be mindful. Was it me that was felt like I was on the edge? Was it my wife? What was it? So we had to be mindful to call that out and have those days when necessary. And it could have been, sometimes it was 2 days, not just a day. We had to take 2 days like that. But after we did that, it was kind of helping each other just get the stress off.
All right. Maybe kind of reset.
It was a reset. That's a good word for it. To reset, to keep moving forward. And boy, it helped.
That's great.
You're having China days, India days, Turkey days, European day, whatever.
Right. Oh, that's good.
Doesn't matter where you live. Everyone has those days, and we have to be on the lookout, not just for ourselves, but how our spouse is reacting to things. That's going to help, because as my wife always says, how we react is going to feed into our kids and how they react.
That's right. They're taking cues from mom and dad.
Exactly.
Right?
And so it starts with us, between us, and then that feeds down to our kids.
That's really great. That's great. Well, Steve, our next point is just to use being married as a benefit to the mission. And I think there's really 2 points there to be made, right? That not do you have a built-in person to, if you're both doing language study, you have a built-in person to, to practice language and begin maybe even using it occasionally in the home, and, get used to the language. But then also, husband is making friends with other men. The wife hopefully is making friends with women, and hopefully you've got some of those people that both of you are making friends with who are married themselves, and so to begin to, you know, build on those friendships by having them both for dinner, and to be able to, a great opportunity just to increase effectiveness in marriage, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. One of the benefits I saw of just being married on the field was, like you were saying, if I meet the guys, we can meet the spouses, we can meet
That's
the
right.
families, we can have
That's
them
right.
over.
That's right.
It all came together, because if it's now, I'm not, neither one of us are saying that being single is wrong or unscriptural in any sense.
That's right.
But strictly
That's right.
as being married, there was benefits to that in ministry when we go
Mm-hmm.
in one accord of and being like-minded, and how, why we're moving there, that it
Mm-hmm.
helps in the practical ministry side, both
Mm.
in who we share with, who we can share with, but also in making those, you know,
Right, making those connections.
one
Mm-hmm.
person can only make so many connections, but the more people you have, like you and your spouse, it gets into families, marriages, and with kids and communities, and yeah, it is um, strategic, it's effective, it's beneficial.
Yeah, that's right. And Steve, of course, some couple months ago we did a whole episode on being single on the
Hmm.
missions field, and there's a lot of effectiveness there too, right? And
Absolutely.
so, we
There's
never, I mean, we
benefits
did.
in both sides.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so we want to highlight that. But of course, if you are married, just knowing, hey, this can be a benefit to what God has called you to do, right? If you leverage that well and really use it. And I would also say, Steve, that if you leverage that in the right way, it can be a really strengthening thing to your marriage. I mean, you think about two Christians who have a heart to, reach people for Christ, obedience to the commands of Christ, and being sent to a particular place, right? And you're both doing that together, and it's like, wow, God really is using my spouse to do the thing that, to help me do the thing that God has called me to do. And that can just be very strengthening to a marriage as well, can't it?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's so many reasons why pursuing a healthy marriage is critical for your ministry,
Mm.
for the mission field. I mean, um, it affects everything. It
Yeah,
does.
it
It
really
can
does.
affect whether you stay or go, whether you stay or have to go home.
That's right.
It can affect your relationship with your church and your supporters back home. It really affects everything.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, Steve, the next one we have is something you've kind of already covered a lot, but just to kind of make time for each other. And I love kind of this idea that you had, that you guys did about these China days, and you just kind of took a day or two, but just to be able to make sure that you're pulling away from the demands of the ministry to get time together, dedicated meals, date nights, time to pray together, time for each other, and it's just key, isn't it? And
Hmm.
again, part of the cool part about being married is you can take those times to pull away, and you've got your best friend already there to do that with. And so, just making that time for each other is good. I think it was Steve in the last episode you'd mentioned, that as we talked about kind of this time to take care of yourself in your marriage, that, there's this idea amongst some in the Christian world that these missionaries that, you've always got to be doing ministry. That's kind of a waste of money to
Hmm.
be, to be, I think you mentioned about going to the beach. One of the things that we did a few times is that we lived in a place, the kind of the next city over from Beijing, in the capital of China, and they had a Western style kind of hotel that had a nice pool. I mean, part of that was for our kids too, but we also got time to kind of pull away, and there's just that just is everything. It's so totally not a waste of ministry resources or time or any of that, because if no one in the family is doing well emotionally or mentally, or the marriage is not well, our kids are not well, there's not much ministry taking place. So again, just taking time for each other is just really, really important in it.
If your whole focus in marriage and in life is strictly ministry, just pure ministry, I can't imagine that you're going to be able to go your whole life and not burn out. Okay?
That's right.
And in the case of your marriage, taking that time for each other. I mean, our last episode, we talked about other ways to take time for yourself and family and all that. But in this particular case, regarding marriage, it's important to do, a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, Jimmy Vaughn, pastor of Authentic Life in Greenville, Texas, will tell you all the time, find a date night for your wife. Now, I get it. There are circumstances when you get to the mission field that maybe prevent you from having a traditional date night. Okay, if you've got small kids and you've got no one directly around you that you're comfortable with leaving your kids with, I get it. We were in that situation for a couple of years. Okay. And so a date night, maybe we may have to bring our kids with us.
Right.
It's okay. It's perfectly okay to do that. But we got to the point where, we had someone that could watch our kids, and, we had someone who would come and clean our apartments, and we became very close with her. She became my family to us.
Oh, right.
And so, after a while, we got to the point where we trusted her enough where we would, our date night would be date lunches, because she would come, she'd be there all day, and we're like, okay, we're going to leave. The kids are going to be fine with her. She knew what to cook them for lunch. She knew how to, change take care of our son who were in diapers and all that stuff. And so we were able to at least go grab a lunch somewhere.
Oh, wasn't that great?
And so those moments.
And it's just time for you and your wife just to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I was thinking, if our whole life is about ministry and that's the only thing we ever talk about, it's hard to also make friends. People only want, then people only see us as ministry people, and they only talk to us when they want to talk about ministry. But if they want to talk about other things, we tend, you can get excluded from those conversations and invitations. So, my pastor loves skiing. So every once in a while he's on the lake. He's got friends who have boats, and they'll take him out, and he's not about going skiing because it helps him. And so,
that's right. Totally.
But, with your marriage, a date night, a date lunch doesn't have to be all day, doesn't have to be for hours. It could just be 30 minutes. Walk down the street, eat somewhere, walk back. Last night, we had to go to Costco. And so that was just, my wife commented as we were coming back, that we had a great just time alone together, even though we ended up at Costco,
Oh, right.
It was just time alone, not having to deal with other things,
just the two of you. Yeah.
Yeah. Just spending time. It could be as simple as that, but you don't want it to be stressful. So you don't want it to be going to 5 supermarkets in a foreign country, because that can bring stress.
Right.
You want it to be relaxing. Yeah. So that kind of go back to eating, because I think in the early stages for us, that was the best option we had, was go find a restaurant nearby and just have a meal and talk about family back, what's going on with our parents, stuff like that, without trying to have to manage the children.
Right.
And it really went a long ways for that. Or, when the Starbucks opened up around the corner, we jet over to Starbucks, or when coffee shops finally became popular where we live, because it took a while, we go to a coffee shop.
Oh, isn't that great?
Simple stuff like that. It doesn't have to be complicated.
That's right. And even to the point, Steve, of, if you've got small kids in particular, if you've got kids, well, little kids, their bedtime might be 7:30 or 8 p.m. And you could technically then they're sleeping and you could still
Movie
have a
night.
nice, yeah, movie night or dessert in a movie and just
Exactly.
stay, so those kind of things are good too. And so hopefully, I mean, as I kind of review all of this as we end this episode, Steve, as I kind of review all of this, a lot of this is just, you know, attention to your spouse and seeing how they deal with the stress, dealing with those things, having intentional time, you know, and just really being able to use the relationship with your spouse to care for that person, use it as a benefit to the mission, doing ministry together. I mean, there's just a lot of this, maybe the overarching thing is that, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, man, if you're not taking that intentional time and doing these things, yeah, the ministry is going to suffer. So this actually has to be, a more important or primary job before you feel like you can do really much ministry, right?
Yeah, I think the key word you use is being intentional.
Yeah, being intentional. That's
You
right.
have because life abroad can consume you in every consume every part of your life, and if you're not careful, suddenly you start drifting apart.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
right.
I've known missionaries who have gotten divorces, and
Mm,
I wouldn't say I don't know what it was like behind the scenes, but definitely in public it wasn't terrible. But in the end, they got a divorce anyways. My wife saw missionaries go down some crazy sinful trails
wow.
that most people would be shocked by.
Mm,
So intentionality, I think, is the best word. You have to pursue it intentionally. You
that's
can't
right.
wait for when it's convenient. You have to.
Right.
It's like anything. You have to. What's important to you, you will carve out time for. If it's not important,
Amen.
you're going to put it on the shelf and forget about it.
That's right. Yeah, that's really true that you do spend, you know, you have intentional time with the things that are most important to you, right? That's really true. And so that's great, Steve. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the kind of we end this episode with this idea of, man, be intentional in this because it's really important. It is really important. So hopefully for those watching and listening, we've been some help to you. We really want to be a help. We would love to hear from you if we could be of any help. Of course, if you go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/missions talk, we'd love to hear from you. Steve, thanks for this great episode. It's been a good one. Thanks all for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you and having you with us on the next episode of Missions Talk.